moment, I'd like to introduce John Wardley. Round of applause, please.
Thanks, Chris. You met ads earlier today by process of elimination. I'm Lewis. You also heard earlier today from obviously Wayne and Jay about the formation of what became TowersTimes, initially with the creation of Wayne's Alton site and SW5 Live. Now on SW5 Live, there was a section of the website documenting John's response to a quick fire interview that we did with yourself, John, all the way back in 2001, as well as some of the comments you made at the European Coaster Club in that same year. It therefore seemed like a nice way to kick off this evening's Q&A to revisit some of those subjects, questions and answers as a way of reflecting on all the change and development that both Alton Towers and the wider industry has seen over the past 20 years.
Now, John, since we've got the written evidence on our archived SW5 Live website, we thought we'd get reminding you of this one out of the way early. One of the questions you were asked about air, back in the summer of 2001, blissfully unaware that the budget gods had other plans. Your answer was as followed to, will the ride be heavily themed? Your response, yes, it will be heavily themed and landscaped. What happened?
Are we getting the worst out first? Yes, it was a budget issue. We've always prided ourselves at Alton Towers to get the attractions built on time and on budget. The budget issue is something that was non-negotiable. When you are answerable to a big corporation such as, first of all, Madame Tussauds, and then various venture capitalists, and now Merlin, there is a fixed sum of money. When that money runs out, that's it. Now, obviously, the way you spend the money, other than in the initial planning, is first of all, the infrastructure goes in, the foundations and so on. You've got a fixed price for the ride hardware. And the people that always get the final bite of the cherry are the poor old themers and landscapers. And as you will probably know, this was a prototype ride. Air was the first flying coaster that B&M had done. I helped develop it. I spent a lot of time over in Switzerland with Bolliger and Mabillard perfecting the cars and the harness and so on. And so that was a fixed price, but there were all sorts of unforeseen issues. Each of the trains is in permanent radio contact with the control system as it goes around the track, and there were problems when we were commissioning for the communications and the communication protocol and so on. So in the end, the thing that had to go was the landscaping and the theming. The tunnel, we had fabulous designs for the tunnel when you leave the station. That never came about. And the rest is history. It was decided, although Air was a big success, it was decided quite a few years down the line that they would put virtual reality on it. I personally felt it would have been much better to have spent the money on more theming and landscaping instead of virtual reality, but it was decided to do that. But that was the situation. So what other awful questions are you going to find?
Well, now we've got the trials and tribulations of Air's tunnel out of the way. On a more sincere note, one of the questions you've probably been asked at almost every event like this, and indeed were back at the ECC in 2001, was about adding a wooden roller coaster to Alton Towers. Back then, your hope was a Woody would have been built at Alton Towers within the next few years, so it took a bit longer than you'd have hoped, but of course we now have Wickerman. You last spoke to us 5 years ago, back in 2017, prior to any official announcement about SW8, and indeed before the ride had even opened and you had the chance to ride it. So you can give us your full thoughts then, but now, 4 years on from Wickerman's opening, is it everything you'd hoped for from a Woody at Alton Towers?
Oh, most definitely, yes. I think I designed 6 Woodies for Alton Towers over the years. I designed a Woody for Alton Towers shortly after we did Megaphobia at Oakwood, which I regarded as a sort of test bed for doing it. And each time I put the idea forward, I was told that Woodies are old-fashioned, they're unsafe, that nobody wants them. And I said, well, you let me build one and I guarantee that it will be popular and it will be safe and it will be fun and will be popular. And they said, but how do you market it? And of course Merlin are extremely hot on marketing, and they said, well, how do you market it? And sure, it's not easy to market, but I said, you've got such talented people now that come up with really curveball ideas, and let's face it, who on earth would build a Woody and call it Wicker Man, and who would theme it in the way that they have? And it's sensational and it's really worked, but they didn't have the confidence in it, and therefore we built Oblivion and then Air and 13 and so on. But as far as Wicker Man is concerned, after I retired, and I let it be known that the reason why I was retiring was I wanted to give someone else a chance. There were some very, very talented people coming up through Merlin. And if you don't know the way it works, Merlin have their own design and development division called Merlin Magic Making, which is based in Acton in London, MMM, Merlin Magic Making. And gradually they were bringing some extremely talented young people into their design studios, and they had great ideas. And the last thing they wanted was an old fart like me saying, well, you shouldn't do it like this and you should do it like that. That was something that I thought was totally inappropriate. So I took a back seat, and that was it. Now, in the case of Wicker Man, and some of you may know this, I got a phone call from Mark Fisher, who was on the main board of Merlin, very good friend of mine, who was once Henry Hound here at Alton Towers, started at the bottom, literally, and he said, how's the new wooden coaster going at Alton Towers? And I said, I don't know, I didn't know you were building a wooden coaster at Alton Towers. He said, well, you've been on about it for years, surely you know. I said, well, no one has told me that they're building a wooden coaster at Alton Towers. So he said, really? Leave it with me. And he phoned me back about 10 minutes later and said, there's been a terrible mistake, because all of us on the board here at Merlin down in Poole thought that you were on the design team. And I said, not only am I not on the design team, it's the first thing I knew about the fact you were building a wooden. Is it one of those that I designed way back? He said, no, I don't think it is. So he said, well, I think we'd like you to join the team. And I said, well, no, I don't think that's really appropriate, because the last thing they want is for me to come on and at best say, oh, you're all doing a great job, wonderful, and pat on the back, in which case, you're wasting my time, or for me to say, oh, this is all wrong, you're not doing it right. So they said, well, we'd like you to be part of the team. And I said, well, I'll only be part of the team if every single member says they want me to be part of the team. So he said, leave it with me. And then I got 7 emails from various people on the team saying, we'd like you to come to a meeting. And so I did, and I looked over the plans, and in fairness, I was quite impressed. I thought the layout of the ride was very good indeed. I was less impressed with the profile. I thought the first drop was really not very good at all, and there were parts of the ride that I felt could be considerably improved. And they said, well, it's too late, we've designed the foundations, the ride is designed, so that's it. So I said, well, okay, it's been nice knowing you all, but what more can I do? So they said, well, would you please put in order of priority the various changes that you think you would like us to make? And then we'll work our way down the list and see what we can actually do. Well, the first thing that was fundamentally wrong was that first drop. And I did a quick no-limit simulation of the ride as proposed, which came as a complete shock to everybody. I don't think any of them had even seen it no limits before, to be perfectly honest. And they were able to ride it on no limits. And then I did a rework of the track as I thought it should be, with the reworked first drop, and the reworked what I call the boring bend, which still exists on the ride to this day. And then I said, and there are a number of other things. There are no kicker wheels in the station, which means that when you dispatch a train, it slowly creeps out of the station. I said, if you put kicker wheels on, that will up your capacity by about 150 riders an hour. And they said, oh, we never thought of that, but we can't afford to do that. So the long and short of it was that the main thing was changing the first drop, which they did, and I'm very, very pleased they did, and I think you'll probably be very pleased that they did. But all in all, I think it was a fabulous ride, and in the end, Nick Varney had to admit that maybe I was right all along, and that a Woody for Alton Towers was the right thing to do.
On the subject of wooden roller coasters, when asked for your favourite coaster outside of what was then the two sorts parks, you noted your love of Blackpool Pleasure Beach, particularly their Woodies, as well as your first ride on Revolution at Magic Mountain in the 1970s. Was one of those that you'll never forget. Has any coaster or ride more generally since then been a favourite of yours?
No, I mean, my favourite coaster, other than the coasters that I've worked on, surprisingly enough, has always been Big Thunder Mountain Railroad at Disneyland. And there's a good reason for this. People tend to think that the sort of people that design roller coasters are sadists that just want to put the living daylights out of people and scare them witless. Nothing could be further from the truth. I firmly believe that a roller coaster can be a great fun experience. If you're too young to ride it, you aspire to it. If you're too frightened to ride it, you aspire to riding it. And most people that pluck up the courage to ride a good roller coaster come off it thinking, I'm really pleased I did that, even if they don't want to ride it again. And that's certainly the case with Nemesis. Very few people ever come off Nemesis and say, I wish I hadn't done it. So, you know, I firmly believe that a well-designed roller coaster has as wide appeal as possible. The American designers used to design coasters and put them behind barbed wire fences with a gate in the fence, metaphorically, that basically said, if you want to ride it, come through this gate, and if you don't, stay away, this isn't for you. And that is not the way I've designed my roller coasters. All the rides, from the Vampire at Chessington, right the way through to Wicker Man, the most recent, whether you're riding it or not, you can still be part of it, you can still enjoy it. That's why we put that final barrel roll into Nemesis, that enable people who were not riding the ride to actually make eye contact with people who are upside down on the ride at their level. And you can't imagine how important that was. It was not an easy thing to do, to incorporate that in the profile of the ride. But I want everybody to enjoy that ride. And the first time I rode Big Thunder Mountain in Disneyland, I thought, this is fabulous. People who don't like roller coasters don't realise it's a roller coaster. They think it's a cute little train. And I was determined to replicate it if I could. And that's why we bought a Mack Blauensian standard layout ride in Chessington and put a plaster mounted over the thing, and people thought that they were riding Britain's answer to Big Thunder Railroad. And it had very, very wide appeal. So, in answer to your question, I think Big Thunder Railroad is a wonderful ride. It still entertains lots and lots of people, and it gets an awful lot of young people riding roller coasters that perhaps never would have done. Does that answer the question? Good.
Back in 2001, you were also asked what had been your greatest challenge to date, to which your response was SW5 and being able to achieve the sensation of flight on a roller coaster. In the time since, did anything pose a greater challenge to you?
No, I think Nemesis and Oblivion and Air, we were writing the rule book. You know, when we came to build Nemesis, it was going head to head with the big one at Blackpool. And I was very friendly with Geoffrey Thompson, and he said, you're crazy spending all that money on a bloody hole. Why on earth are you spending nearly half your budget digging a hole? And of course, the last thing Blackpool needed to do with the big one was dig any holes. They just sent the thing as high up in the air as they possibly could. Well, of course, we couldn't do that here at Alton Towers. Nothing could be visible from outside the park, including if you walk way up on the Weaver Hills, way about 10 miles away, and you look down, you don't see anything, and that is one of the planning conditions. So how on earth do you build a roller coaster that doesn't go up high? And the answer is quite simple. You dig a great big hole and you send it down in the ground. And that's why we did the same thing with Oblivion. But of course, with Oblivion, the fun is where on earth are you going? You're just disappearing into a hole. You de-emphasize the exit from that hole and make everybody concentrate their attention on the entry hole. And so those two rides were an enormous challenge. And then, of course, with Air, the challenge was how do you get people into that flying position that will fit people of hugely varying bodily dimensions, and how do you do it quickly and safely? Quickly because you want to be able to dispatch the trains as fast as possible, safely for obvious reasons. So that was a huge challenge. And I have to say that the rides since have not posed those enormous challenges.
Fantastic. You also mentioned trying to design a B&M inverted coaster for Chessington as another challenge at the time. Are you excited to see what Chessington do with their, and here's some words I don't know if what to say, launched shuffle B&M wing coaster that's opening next year?
Yes, I was, when I saw the plans for it, I thought it was so clever, really clever. Because how do you get high capacity out of a shuttle coaster? I mean, a wing coaster is a pain in the backside as far as loading, because you've in effect got two loading platforms on each side and two unloading platforms, and it's a very expensive thing infrastructure-wise. But I was very, very impressed with what the proposals are, yes.
This leads nicely into the next question. As when you were asked to look 5 years ahead from 2001 at the major changes in roller coaster technology that were coming, you cited hydraulic and pneumatic launching, new seating mechanisms, and pre-laminated beam technology on woodies. In the past 20 years, things have obviously progressed beyond what you could have foreseen back then, with Chessington's new coaster being a prime example of that. So is there anything new that's come along that's particularly impressed or even surprised you?
It is coming along here.
Bombshell answer. Okay, well, before opening up questions to the floor, we did want to look to the future, so that's led nicely into that, if unexpected. One thing that we do know will be happening, obviously, within the next few years, is Nemesis's track replacement. John, it must be quite fulfilling for you to see that, although one of your creations is reaching the end of its intended operational lifespan, its popularity remains such that Alton Towers and Merlin are inclined to effectively buy another one.
Yeah, when we were... No, wait a minute, let me just start a little bit further back. As to what my role is now, because I'm very honoured indeed to be asked to be involved in projects here. I don't move any further south than Alton Towers. I've told them I'm not slipping up and down the motorway anymore, I'm too old to do that. But as far as Alton Towers is concerned, this is my first love. I think Alton Towers is a wonderful park. I was involved in the development of Alton Towers. I was involved in the original purchase of Alton Towers after Chessington proved to be a success. And I was the guy that went around and started to produce the first asset register for the accountants to work out how much they were going to pay for the place. So Alton Towers is my first love. And after I retired, as I say, MMM had a lot of very keen, talented designers who weren't necessarily particularly knowledgeable within the theme park industry or within the amusement ride industry. They'd come from theatrical backgrounds, from interior design backgrounds and so on. And they were left to their own devices. But very recently, within the last couple of years, I think probably the board realised that a little bit of good old-fashioned wisdom is nice to have around. And the person that you should all get really excited about is a guy called John Burton. Now, John is now the lead designer for Alton Towers. He's a person that you need to get to know. He loves his theme parks. He loves Alton Towers. He used to come here as a kid and ride the rides as they were when we first built the likes of the Haunted House and so on, Tourland Tours. And John obviously values my input. In fact, we had over a 2-hour Zoom meeting yesterday regarding one of the projects. So I am very honoured to be involved again in projects. I'm not leading the projects, I'm not designing them, I'm just offering a little bit of perhaps good old-fashioned wisdom. So that is kind of where I am. What was the question?
It was regarding Nemesis.
Oh yeah, right, Nemesis. So they asked my opinion quite a few years back on what they should replace Nemesis with, as it was getting very old. I mean, as coasters go, it's 30 years old. Little did we think 30 years ago that we would be faced with this dilemma. We didn't think of that. And they said, you know, we're going to have to come up with a new ride. I said, okay, if that's what you want, but you better sound an awful lot of people out on the subject, which they did. And overwhelmingly, people were basically saying, don't mess about with Nemesis. You know, don't mess about with it. And your applause reiterates that. There's nothing I would do to change the profile of that ride. Yes, times have moved on in terms of technology, so you know, there will be, if and when, and I say if and when, the project goes ahead, you know, there will be changes made, but you can rest assured that the ride as you know it will not change, that it will still be the same thrilling ride. It will run as smoothly as it ever did on the first day it opened. It will be as fast or even faster than ever. And so you don't need to worry about Nemesis. Nemesis is safe, I think, for another 30 years. And I'm not doing that.
That's fantastic to hear. Now, in that line, is there anything you think there's potential to add or enhance around the ride as part of the overhaul that would further improve the ride experience in any way?
Well, that really is up to John Burton. I think if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I think it would be unwise to start adding bells and whistles that are not needed. The ride delivers, and it delivers extremely well. And it's just a case of freshening it up and creating, you know, a really spick and span ride. So I think the worst thing that they could do is de-emphasise the ride proper and add unnecessary bells and whistles to it. But I think John will come up with some, and I know he is already working on various ideas that will just make the presentation of the ride even better.
To start off with the lighter side, before we open many cans of worms, you have your John's Miniatures YouTube channel, right? With the two little projects? Is there any more in the pipeline?
No,
I
I'm
hope so.
far too busy
Right. I was
on
going to
more important things.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you ever had a model railway, because it's just the same size as that. I just want to know.
Yeah. No, when I was a kid, I always had a model railway, and when I had a bit of time on my hands a few years ago, I was kind of doodling and played around with those and videoed them and put them on YouTube, and it seemed to be quite amusing. Yeah.
Just a quick question. With the recent developments at Phantasialand, with the development of the new Fly roller coaster, what are your kind of thoughts on the development that they've done on the original base that was air, on kind of developing and upgrading the flying coaster to the what is now kind of like the new model that is coming through pipelines?
Yes, I mean, that ride is beautifully themed, very, very well conceived. It's a fabulous layout. And obviously, as the years go by, and I mean, I don't know how many inverted coasters have been produced since Nemesis. I mean, it runs into many dozens. So improvements will be made, technical improvements will be made. Phantasialand have a track record of some amazingly imaginative theming. They have budgets that allow them to do that. So, you know, I think it really is a superb ride, and it takes all the technical sophistication of first Nemesis and then Air with the flying trains and various other improvements that B&M have created over the years. I mean, the secret to B&M track, which very few people seem to understand, and the reason why B&M track is so much better than anyone else's is because of a patent that B&M have for that box beam. If you look at the spine beam of a B&M coaster, you'll see that it's made up of a series of triangles. That enables you to create a square section tube that has got a twist to it that could be very accurately designed on a computer and very accurately fabricated in a welding shop. That spine beam is something that no other manufacturer is able to do, other than the odd Chinese manufacturer that couldn't care about patents in any case. But that is the secret to B&M track, and it doesn't matter whether it's a flying coaster or a vertical drop coaster or whatever. You know, the B&M track is the best in the world. But that Phantasialand ride is a superb ride. Yeah.
Thanks for speaking to us this evening. You spoke a little bit about your relationship with Jeffrey Thompson, and I know you were intimately involved in the design of the Magic Show back in probably the 80s there.
Yes.
Obviously there's been quite a bit of rivalry between Alton Towers and Blackpool over the years, specifically in '94 and probably thereafter as well. Could you talk to us a little bit about your relationship with Jeffrey himself, maybe in the context of that rivalry over the years?
Oh yeah, I mean, we had a very good understanding. He knew that we were building a ride, but didn't know what it was, and we weren't going to tell him. But Blackpool were making a big song and dance about it was going to be the world's tallest, fastest, most amazing roller coaster. Now, how I first got to know Jeffrey, I built a dark ride at Barry Island, which was the first dark ride I built, and that was when I was in my early 20s, like 50 odd years ago. It was called Uncle Frankenstein's Scream Machine, and it was, although I say it myself, that was groundbreaking. And it was a very, very successful dark ride. And Jeffrey came down to see it because there was one effect in it that he didn't understand how it worked, and he wanted to put it into the Ghost Train at Blackpool. So he came down and met him, very nice and all that, and he said, well, what are you thinking about doing? And I said, well, we've got another dark ride here which isn't very successful. I think I might turn it into a gold mine ride. And he said, well, come up to Blackpool, You can go around the gold mine ride here, have a good look at it, see how it works and so on. So I went up to Blackpool, and the rest was history in terms of we built the Wacky Gold Mine ride, which again was very successful. And I got to know Geoffrey. Well, then we didn't have very much to do with each other professionally for quite a few years, until the grand opening of Chessington World of Adventures in 1987, I think it was. We got Prince Edward to open it. And I had to take Prince Edward on the log flume on Dragon River. And after the grand opening, they set up a marquee on the lawn in front of Burnt Stub, and all the great and the good from the world of industry and finance and the Madame Tussauds board and all that were there. And Geoffrey Thompson, being one of the great and the good in the theme park industry, was there. And we were sat together on the same table as Prince Andrew. Well, many years previously, I had been involved in building magical illusions. And also, I had an act of my own that I used to perform. And Geoffrey said to me, "Are you happy with what you've done here at Chessington?" And I said, "Well, yes, except the circus is not working. The circus really, people aren't going in there. It doesn't seem to be appealing to people." But so he said, "What do you think you're doing?" And I said, "Well, my ambition will be to put in a big, spectacular magic show. But it won't be for quite a few years yet, because we've got enough on our plate with what we've just built." So he said, "Well, we've had a show running in the Horseshoe Bar at Blackpool, Viva shows. First of all, we had Viva Brazil and Viva Las Vegas and Viva Paris." And he said, "We're beginning to run out of Viva ideas." He said, "It's going to be Viva Milton Keynes or something." So he said, do you think a magic show would work?" And I said, "Well, yeah, let's talk about it." So I went up to Blackpool, talked to him and his show producer, and then I came back and I had a word with Ray Barrett, who was in effect my boss on the Tussauds board. And I said, "Would it be a conflict of interests if I worked with Blackpool Pleasure Beach on a magic show?" And he said, "Well, no, if it's something that you'll gain a bit of experience that we can use in the long term, then go for it." So I went up and we created Mystique, and Mystique ran for, I think, about 14 or 15 years. It was the longest running magic show in Blackpool.
Now we've seen hybrid coasters sort of bed in and age a bit, and we've seen what they can do in terms of like Steel Vengeance and Iguazi, etc. What are your opinions on hybrid coasters, and what would one look like if you were to design one today?
Do you mean the combination of wood and steel, both track and structure, and forming steel track as a flat section in the way that Rocky Mountain and those sorts of people are doing? Is that what you mean by a hybrid coaster?
Yeah, so steel.
Yeah. Everybody that has ridden a hybrid coaster says it doesn't feel like a woody. Now, it's very, very difficult to put into words, if you describe to people the feeling of a woody. It's a much more earthy experience. I mean, I remember as a kid getting a few planks and some pram wheels and screwing things together and finding some waste ground with some slopes and creating my own sort of rickety thrill ride. And that is really the sort of sensation that a good woody gives you. You feel safe, you feel secure, but at the same time it's a real earthy kind of experience. And all the people that ride these hybrid coasters say that they feel perhaps a bit too sanitised. But having said that, it does mean that you can have inversions. It does mean that you can do an awful lot more with the trains in terms of track lengths, trick tracks, and so on. You know, who knows? A hybrid coaster might be an option on the table.
Hi John, I was wondering what your favourite ride is that you haven't designed, and how did you get to work with Portaventura?
Right, well, I think I've already answered. My favourite ride was Big Thunder Mountain Railroad, for the reasons I've explained. As far as Portaventura is concerned, that's an interesting story. We had acquired Alton Towers. It was proving very successful. We were approached by a Spanish bank called La Caixa, and they were financing a project that had been originated by the management of the Little Tibidabo amusement park in Barcelona. And after Disney had decided against putting their European park in Salou on that site and go for Paris, and the rest of the industry was sort of thinking, well, you're mad. The Paris site is the Spanish site is a wonderful one in terms of weather and location and so on. So they decided that they wanted to float a project for a big theme park on that site, but they didn't know how to do it. So they got in touch with Busch Gardens in the States and formed a partnership that consisted of Tibidabo, the Busch management and Anheuser-Busch, and La Caixa, and got the project underway. But very soon they realised that there were all sorts of cultural differences between the American way and the Spanish or European culture. And it was proving quite an unhappy project. And La Caixa decided that they were sick and tired of, taking boxing gloves off people at meetings. And they thought it would be a good idea if we can find an intermediary that understands theme parks, that can talk to the Americans in their language, but at the same time understands the European market. And so they approached Pearson's, who of course owned Madame Tussauds, and Pearson's said to Mike Jolly, who was chief executive of Madame Tussauds, would you be interested in us becoming a partner in the project? So quick decisions had to be made, because already they were signing contracts for rides. And so Mike Jolly sent Peter Selinger and myself out to Salou, to the site, to have a look at it and come back with a report. And what we found was a gigantic dust bowl of a site with a huge amount of excavation taking place, an awful lot of concrete being poured, and contracts had been signed for a number of rides. I was tasked with deciding whether the project from a technical standpoint was going to be feasible. Peter Selinger was tasked with deciding whether financially it was going to be feasible. And I went through the various plans and contracts, and some of the rides were patently crazy, really badly thought out. The sort of rides that were a manufacturer's dream, in other words, the most expensive ride that they could possibly sell, but not necessarily the best ride or the most appropriate for the park. And when they were about to sign a contract with Vekoma for a carbon copy of the the arrow looping coaster at Busch Gardens in Williamsburg. Loch Ness Monster. Now the Loch Ness Monster, as you probably know, has got interlocking loops, and Arrow was selling it on the basis that they showed them promotional videos showing the two trains going through the loops, the interlocking loops together. And the management went dewy-eyed at the sight of it and thought, isn't that wonderful? But as anybody that really knows, that involves you dispatching the trains at very, very accurate intervals. And all you need is a slight delay in loading and dispatching a train, and that sight of the two interlocking loops with trains going through them just never happens. I pointed that out to them and they just didn't realise. And there were many things. The fact that it was going to be a carbon copy of the Loch Ness Monster was great because it meant that Arrow didn't have to do any design work whatsoever. In fact, it was going to be fabricated by Vekoma, but from Arrow's designs. And I insisted that they pull the plugs on the ride, much to the consternation of Vekoma. And Mr. Hooper has never spoken to me from that day to this. But I had to think of some replacement, and that was where we'd had a very happy experience with Nemesis, with B&M. I got in touch with Walter and Claude and said we need to come up with a ride quickly, literally within weeks. We've got to have a contract signed within a few weeks, and Dragon Khan was the result. And I also changed quite a few of the other rides. There were a lot of things that I thought were wrong, that I was proved wrong. One of them was the amount of restaurant capacity and catering capacity. And they said, no, the Spanish like to eat when they're out, and they like to eat big meals, proper meals. And they said, from our experience, the English like to have lunch from about 12 o'clock to 2 o'clock. The French like to have, the Germans like to have lunch from 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock. The French like to have lunch from 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock, and so on, and therefore you can turn the tables round. And in fact, I was proved completely wrong that the capacity that I thought was in excess proved to be inadequate. But in terms of the rides, we changed quite a few of the rides. We were able to pull the plugs on some of the contracts. The opening day of PortAventura was wonderful. You can't imagine what it's like to be in a park that has never had any visitors in it and is empty, and then the tape is cut at the main entrance and a great sea of thousands of people start to fill a place that has never been seen to be full before. And it was very exciting on opening day. And I was very sad when we sold our interest, but we had to sell in order to finance the purchase of Thorpe Park. So without the sale of PortAventura, we wouldn't have been able to own Thorpe Park, which I think was all in all a good thing.
Obviously, with your priority being the design of the actual coasters themselves, despite this I can still tell that you're extremely enthusiastic about the theming and the whole package with the coasters. And with Secret Weapon 1, obviously the initial plan, as you said, was a military weapon of some kind, a secret weapon, barbed wire, and I see that you carried that theme over to Oblivion. And with that theme being expanded on and overall carrying over to the X sector as a whole, with the introduction of the Smiler in 2013, do you feel like the addition of the additional theming added to X Sector and the backstory of the Ministry of Joy and the adjustments to Oblivion to incorporate this, do you feel like that impacted your original vision and either detrimental or improved it?
That's a very good question. First of all, let me clarify that I am not a roller coaster designer. I'm a theme park designer, first and foremost, and actually, first and foremost, I'm an entertainer. And if it is appropriate to use a roller coaster for a new attraction, that's fine. But there are other tools at our disposal. Water rides, or things like Hex, which, don't ask me why Hex isn't open, because I can honestly say I haven't got a clue. The main thing is the entertainment product. So normally one is given a brief. Who is it to entertain? Is it to entertain a wide range of people? Is it for the thrill seeker or whatever? And if the answer is a roller coaster, and Merlin have always found that, and many parts around the world find that roller coasters do pull in the crowds because they're easy for people to understand what they are. But we've always done it a bit differently. We haven't. I mean, the traditional way that a so-called theme park would put a coaster in, the only design elements they would think of as what colour do we paint it and what silly name can we call it. We've always taken a different approach to that, to create a much more rounded entertainment product. And in the case of the Smiler, and I have to say I wasn't really involved in the Smiler much, and certainly the theme of it I couldn't really get my head around. I thought this is bizarre. And that's one of the reasons why I thought the time has come for me to take a back seat in these matters, because I didn't think that the Smiler was going to work in terms of the theme and the Ministry of Joy and all that kind of stuff. But it obviously has worked. The way in which you present a coaster differentiates you from other parks and other attractions, and it's something that we would never here at Alton Towers just build a standard roller coaster and plonk it on the site. You know, there have been times when we've had to do a project in a bit of a hurry, or the planners have got us over a barrel, as they quite often do, and make it very difficult for us. And there's not an awful lot that we can do in terms of theming and so on. In the case of 13, I mean, that was a very interesting one. 13 was the first coaster with that kind of track drop, and subsequently that's been used in coasters, and of course the new Hagrid's coaster in Universal in Florida uses the same technology that we pioneered. So the important thing is that what has made Alton Towers a success is the fact that we don't go to a manufacturer and say, what is your latest gimmick kind of coaster? Can you make it the highest, the fastest, or give it some unique selling point? And please go ahead and build it, and all we'll worry about is what we're going to call it. That's not the way that we do things at Alton Towers, and I believe the way we do it at Alton Towers is the right way.
Hi John. Over here, to your left. Aidan, I just want to know how you keep your amazing physique. You look so good. How do you do that? I don't know how to answer that question. You do look so good.
Well, it's just a case of being active, and you know, it's very easy when you get older. I can remember someone said to me that the day you retire, you've got to make sure you fill your life with other stuff, because if come the Monday morning when you're no longer employed or gainfully employed, you sit down at your desk and you think, what the hell do I do now? And that was one of the reasons why I started building those silly little models, and I built some magical illusions for somebody and various other things. And you've just got to keep yourself fit and active, which is what I do, I think.
Hi John. What gave you the inspiration for Oblivion? Like what gave you the inspiration to make it a Ministry of Joy and accept that whole dark, sinister, and evil? Like what gave you inspiration for that?
Right. Well, we decided that we were going to build a vertical drop coaster, and as I say, the unique selling point was going to be the fact it just disappeared into a hole in the ground. And the name was not easy, was not difficult to find, because the thing was going to drop into oblivion. That was basically it. So it was just a case of the creatives taking the visual of the ride, the name Oblivion, the fact it disappeared into the ground, and coming up with the visual pattern, if you like, of Oblivion. So I would say of all the rides, Oblivion was the easiest one to name and theme. It's really sort of, named itself and themed itself. It wasn't difficult. The other rides, probably the Smile was the most difficult one. You know, when you've got a ride that is condensed into a very small space with lots of inversions to it, you know, what do you do with that? But I would say Oblivion, the theme of Oblivion was a dead easy one to do. And the fun we had, of course, of sealing off the site and having the security guards and not letting anybody know what it was or what it did. And then this gigantic ditch that we built, and then people saw the ditch being filled in. You know, it was great fun. The actual teasing of the guests, if you like. Yeah.
Hi John.
Hi.
You joked about the loss of contact with Vekoma following the Loch Ness Monster pullout with Portaventura.
Yes.
And sometime in the 2000s there was a sort of Vekoma broomstick type ride that was planned but never came for Gloomy Wood, where the Haunted Hollow now is.
Yes.
What was your involvement with that and your thoughts on the idea of that?
Well, again, I was not involved. When To Swords sold their theme park business, there was a fresh start, if you like. Parks fall out with manufacturers on a regular basis. 1 minute they're flavour of the month, and then the next minute, after you've found the ride has been problematical or unreliable or goes over budget or whatever, which ours don't, they fall out with manufacturers, and then they sort of kiss and make up a few years later. So as far as any plans for a Vekoma ride of that basis, I mean, obviously Vekoma, they knew that we were working, well, they thought they knew we were working with B&M on a flying coaster when they were also planning their flying coaster. They didn't know how we were going to do it. And I firmly believe the way we and B&M did it was superior to the way Vekoma do it. Although the Vekoma product is far cheaper and far simpler, much cheaper and simpler. I mean, this is the thing, when you deal with B&M, it's rather like, you know, you can buy a Ford or even a Mercedes, but if you aspire to a Ferrari or you know, a real top of the range car, you have to pay for it, but you get quality. And the reason why we've gone with B&M on so many rides has been that you do get what you pay for, and they are ridiculously expensive, but they're superb people to deal with, very easy, very amenable, they communicate properly. The price you pay, that is what you get, and you don't suddenly find when it turns up that you have to pay extra for this and extra for that and so on. You know, that's why we've dealt with B&M. Occasionally a manufacturer comes along with a proposal that is attractive. So when Gerstlauer came along with the idea of a vertical lift and a more than vertical drop, that kind of appealed, which is why we put the ride into Thorpe Park. Subsequent before that went into Thorpe Park, I was involved with William McNamara at Oakwood for the Gerstlauer ride there. And then the likes of Intamin come along and say, well, we've got very successful magnetic brakes on our drop towers, so would you like us to think about a piece of roller coaster track that drops using magnetic brakes? So, you know, that's how that ride came about. So occasionally manufacturers come along with a new idea, and sometimes we go to manufacturers, as I've done with B&M with ideas. Certainly literally on opening day of Nemesis, Walter and I sat underneath the ride, and I said to Walter, "We've got a hell of a problem here, Walter." And he looked very worried. He said, "What?" And I said, "What the hell do we do next?" That was when we threw around the ideas of the vertical drop. And then, after we built Oblivion, the same thing came about, where I said, "Well, you built stand-up coasters, you built sit-down coasters, you built stand-up coasters. Wouldn't it be wonderful if you could fly underneath, rather like Superman?" And that was when the idea of Air came about, which has been a very, very successful product for B&M. They have built a lot of them. You know, we take the hit on having the first, which means that we have to iron out the teething problems with them. But at least they're only a short flight away, and their engineers can be over with us in a day if we do have a problem. Whereas if they were to do a prototype in the States, it's much more complicated for them to iron out teething problems if the prototype is 5,000 or 6,000 miles away. Yeah, does that answer the question as far as Vekoma is concerned? Yeah.
Hiya, John. Myself and Wayne spoke earlier about SW5 Live, and obviously Wayne was the one that broke the news that it was a flying coaster. And he spoke about how Martin, years later, obviously told him that they weren't very happy with him. Did you at the time kind of know this was going on? Did you have any feelings about it at the time?
Are you talking about we weren't happy with B&M?
No, you weren't happy that obviously Wayne's Alton site, SW5live.com, had broke the news that it was a flying coaster after we took pictures on the car parks.
Oh, I don't know anything about that at all.
Awesome.
I have no idea what that was all about. We kept the trains well wrapped up. When they arrived, we kept the trains under tarpaulins, and we knew that there were enthusiasts lurking in the bushes. and they were camping out. They were literally camping out. But you can't keep a secret like that forever. And eventually when we, because nobody worked out, they could see the track, they could see it was basically an inverted track. But it didn't have a twist to it at the top of the lift, so it was obviously not going to turn you into that flying position in the way that the Vekoma product did. But once we actually took the tarpaulins off the trains, it was not easy for the lads that were lurking in the bushes. And let's face it, there is a public footpath goes along there. We couldn't stop them if they want, and they camped out day and night, literally day and night, in the hope that they could fly. And you know, that's fine, but I don't think, to be honest, anybody really was too worried about it. The news was going to come out, and that's fine. Yeah.
I've just been told to be nice.
What's coming?
Have you ever thought about a title for your autobiography, and when is it coming out? And what would you like your epitaph to say?
As far as the autobiography is concerned, it's out, available at reasonable prices on Amazon. As far as my epitaph is, I get a great deal of satisfaction out of allowing people to test the boundaries of what they want to do. Not everybody has the money or the wherewithal to go skydiving, bungee jumping, whitewater rafting. Some things require a lot of training, some things require specialist equipment, some things require a lot of travel. But everyone can go to a theme park and can test the boundaries of what they dare and dare not do. And I think this is a very important thing for everybody to do, to test the boundary and push it a little bit, just as far as you're comfortable to do. So although I can't really sum up my epitaph in a few words, it would be something along the lines of I tested the boundaries of their emotions. How are we doing for time? I was
going to say, we'll do 3 more questions, John, so 3 more. Start over here. Emily?
Speaking from your experience, what would be some key advice for someone interested in pursuing a career like yours?
I think it's a case of there are so many different approaches that you can take. My background is in the entertainment industry. I'm not an engineer. I'm not a businessman or a marketeer. I trained at drama school as a stage manager. Jenny, my wife, and I both met at college. We both trained in the theatre. After we both went into professional theatre stage management, she went into television and became a vision mixer, and I went into film special effects. And it was while I was working on the film effects that I thought it was, some of the effects that we did were pretty colossal. Some of the stuff on the Bond films were amazing. And whenever you had a visitor from outside come and watch what we were doing, it used to blow their minds, the scale of the sets and the construction and the effects. And I thought it's such a shame that this has to be filmed and dubbed and edited and eventually projected onto a screen. And I thought, I just missed the live audience, the hum of the crowd, literally. And I thought if only there was some way in which you could bring what we're doing in terms of the thrills and fun of the film industry to a live audience. And that's what I thought, well, that must be what the theme park in America is all about and what Disneyland is all about. So I jumped on a plane and I went to Disneyland, and the rest is history. But lots of people contact me and ask the same question. And some of them have got a technical interest in the engineering side, and obviously that is a way up. Although the trouble is, there are no major manufacturers in Britain anymore. They're all on the continent and in America. So from an engineering standpoint, it's not easy to get into it. You can work your way up through a theme park as an operator, as an awful lot of people within Alton Towers. If you take Mark Fisher, who is about to retire next year, who's second in command to Nick Varney, Mark was a costume character here at Alton Towers. He started literally in a Henry and Howard costume, and became, on the main board of Merlin. So there are ways of working up through the organisation. A lot of people work their way up through ride operations and can move sideways. And Merlin, as an organisation, is superb at providing the opportunities for people to develop their careers, in conjunction with Staffordshire University, with the amazing university course that they have devised. It's just wonderful to see all the people coming up through that with a proper qualification in our industry. But there are also other opportunities within Merlin that other companies don't provide. So I would say that there are lots of different avenues that you can take, and you just really have to use a bit of initiative to work out what you feel your special skills are. Are they in the technical side? Are they in the creative side? Are they in the managerial side? Are they in the financial side? There's lots of different ways in which you can approach it. So say, what am I interested in? Where do my skills lie? And how can I go for it? I hope that was helpful.
It's been nearly 30 years since Nemesis, and indeed a lot of other things here that you've worked on.
Yes.
And I was just wondering, how does it feel when you come back to Alton Towers and see everything, and what are your thoughts?
I love it. I was with my family on the park the weekend before last, with kids from the age of 4 up to 15, together with other generations and so on. And I basically love being on the park. And incidentally, the saddest emails I ever get are from people saying, oh, we saw you on the park, but we were too shy to come up and say hello. But don't be shy. I just love chatting to people. I love being on the park. I love meeting all of you. I wish I could meet all of you here individually now. And so I think the answer is, and perhaps that's the secret of my success, when you really love what you're doing, and I'm a very lucky person to have had a career as I have had. But when you enjoy it, when I look at the park, it's looking smart, spick and span. The rides are looking good, and to know that I'm still being consulted on the future gives me an enormous thrill. So Alton Towers is the park that I love, and I always will do. Yeah.
Hi John, is there anything that you think Alton Towers now need to add to their lineup? Because currently they've got pretty much everything apart from what you might think they've not sort of got at the moment.
There is no end to the possibilities. Obviously we're not short of space. We are short of opportunities that the planners will let us do and develop. But I can assure you that in the next few weeks, Alton Towers will, and actually I respect you enormously, because none of you have actually said, well, what is the next plan, what's happening here, what's happening there, because I can't answer that. I'm sure you understand that Alton Towers release information when they need to release it, when they want to release it. And it has to be done in a fairly formal way. It's not a case of a little bit of gossip here and a bit of gossip there and so on. So Alton Towers will be announcing in due course what their plans are for the future and for the next few years. All I can say is that there is a huge, very, very experienced creative team now back in Berlin that really do understand their parks. It's taken a little while for this to happen, but all the stuff that has been run past me over the last 6 months, I have been really excited by, very, very excited by, and that hasn't necessarily been the case many years back, when I thought, I don't think this is the right thing, I don't think you're doing it right. But now it really is full steam ahead. There are some brilliant ideas that have been worked up that are just as novel and mind-blowing as the stuff that we did way back. So thank you for your patience in terms of not pressing me, and I'm most grateful for that. All I will say is that you don't need to wait too much longer for some fairly exciting announcements that are going to be made.
I was going to say, raise your hand to Mr. John Wardley.